Number 1. Scared Girl. I used to babysit for a family who lived a ways out of town. They had a beautiful house, a couple of great kids, and a really big yard. And beyond the yard were tons of trees. It was just very, very beautiful, and for the most part, it was peaceful and very serene. There were 2 kids, a boy and a girl. They were both sweet and well behaved. I had babysat for them for about 2 years when this happened. On the night it happened, nothing out of the ordinary happened at first. I came, the parents gave me money for the pizza, and they let me know when they expected to be back. It would be really late, near to 4 o'clock in the morning. But this wasn't unusual for them. They liked to go to parties that went really late into the night. We had our pizza, watched some light TV, and I sent them to bed. It was around 11 when I heard some walking around in the upstairs. It was weird because these 2 kids had iron bladders. They never got up to use the bathroom. I heard some footsteps for a couple of moments, and then it was quiet again. I figured maybe the kids just had to get up for a moment or two. Then, about 10 minutes after the footsteps stopped, I heard the noise of someone walking again. This time, it was coming down the steps. I noticed the young girl I was sitting for come into the room. She was rubbing her eyes and she ran up to me. She told me that some man had looked in her room from the hallway. I was only mildly concerned. I mean, as a babysitter, it was something that I would have to check out. But mainly, I thought that this was simply a little girl scared of shadows or who had a bad dream. I checked out the entire house, and of course, there was no one in the house at all. However, even after I confirmed this, she was too scared to go back into her room and sleep by herself. So I went ahead and let her curl up next to me on the couch and go to bed. About 10 minutes after I had been done checking the house, I heard this loud and blood-curdling human scream coming from outside the house. The boy came running down the stairs shortly after. I had him sit on the couch with his sister while I went to check it out. I was scared as I went outside, but I had to make sure the kids were safe. I didn't think that I could call the police just because I heard one scream. I had the porch lights on, and I walked around to the side of the porch. While I was staring out into the trees, I once again heard a similar scream as the last one. It was coming from out in the trees, on the left side of the house. I could feel the hair standing up on the back of my neck. I was debating whether or not I should check out further what was going on outside, or go back into the house. However, while I was thinking about it, I heard another scream, coming from the same area. That was enough. I ran in the house, and I told the son to call the police and then his parents. I told him I was going to check out all the rooms and make sure the house was secured. I gave him a baseball bat, and I grabbed a knife without letting the kids see it. The first room I checked was the parents' room, and was horrified to find the window not only open, but the screen removed. I closed and locked the window before I heard a 4th scream. I did my best to secure the house. However, I didn't want to spend too much time away from the kids. I got back to the kids. They had called both their parents and the police. Both were on their way. We curled up on the couch until they arrived. We didn't hear any more screams. The police didn't find anyone, but I know the house was broken into. It could have just been a prank to scare us. If it was, it worked. Number 2. Treehouse. I used to babysit for a family that had 2 boys, one 10 and one 12. They were a lot easier to care for than you hear boys their age are. They played a lot outside in the backyard. They even had a full treehouse that they spent a lot of time in. A lot of times, when I was over there babysitting, they spent a lot of time just playing in their treehouse. There were even times when their parents would let them camp out in the treehouse. They had done it a few times when I babysat for them, normally in the summer. In those instances, I only had to go and check up on them every so often. This took place during a pretty hot summer. The kids were all excited about sleeping out in the treehouse. Their mom had told me it would be all right. I just had to go check on them every hour. I tended to always do this, including after they had gone to sleep. So I went back and forth several times. The boys were staying up late, reading comics and just being boys. When I went out to check on them around 11 o'clock, they had finally fallen asleep. I turned off the light they had, and they went back to the house. On the way back, though, I paused for just a moment. There was a light on in the second story of the house. That wasn't that unusual on its own, but as I was walking back toward the house, I saw the light turn off. This wasn't just a case of my eyes playing tricks on me either. I mean, yeah, the light flipped off immediately after I got to the bottom of the tree, but I knew that I had seen it on. I wasn't sure what to do at first, but I took out my cell phone and called 911. After that, I climbed back up into the treehouse. I turned on the light quickly. I woke up the boys, and I didn't tell them what I had seen, but only that they would hear police sirens and not to worry about it. The police arrived, and I watched them from the treehouse as they went in. An officer also came over to the treehouse and indicated to us that it was okay to come down from the tree. I watched again as cops came out of the house with a man in cuffs. They had found him, hunkered down in the boys' room, in their closet, holding a knife. I don't know if he was waiting for them. I don't know if he was waiting for me. I don't know if he was just there to rob the place, but I'm glad I saw that light switch off. Number 3. Just weird. I don't know if this story will scare anyone, or if they will just think it will be weird. I mean, it definitely scared me when it happened. I was babysitting for a family who had a really beautiful, but also very old mansion. The family room, where the television was, had an extremely beautiful fireplace as well. I often, in the winter, would sit in there by the fireplace and read a book. I really loved it, especially because my family didn't have anything like that. This night had been going by as normally as any other. The parents were going to be out all night, which was pretty normal for them. I put the kids to bed at 9 p.m., made sure there was some wood on the fire, and then I went back to reading my book. I had been reading for quite a while when I heard a noise. It sounded like a loud knocking noise, but it wasn't anyone knocking on the door. I went and checked on all the kids, and they were asleep in their beds. So I went back to my book, but immediately upon entering the family room, I heard the noise again. I decided I would listen, and if I heard a few more times, see if I could tell where it was coming from. I did hear it again, and then again. It was almost rhythmic, actually. I followed the sound, which seemed to be coming from the back of the house. I went through the servants' kitchen, which was a room that the family didn't really use anymore. They basically just used the door to go into the backyard. The noise was coming from outside, in the side backyard, outside that kitchen. I ran over to the door and felt around for the light switch. When I flipped on the light, I saw a figure standing far off in the side yard. The person had an axe in his hand. He took the axe, held it up, and swung it down, making the noise that I heard. It looked like he was cutting a small log in half. Then he grabbed another log, put it up, and did the same thing. He seemed really oblivious to the fact that I had turned the light on. In fact, I didn't notice any sort of reaction. I had no idea what to do. For a few moments I considered going out the door and checking to see if he was a neighbor, a relative, or just checking to see if he was alright. I didn't think that he might be a danger, really. I mean, he had an axe, and if he was wanting to break into the house and do anything, he could have done that. I almost really opened that door, but caution stepped in and I decided not to. I simply slunk back into the other room, quietly picked up the phone, and called the police. I mean, at the very least the man was trespassing. The story gets a bit stranger. The police came, and when they approached the man, he apparently swung at them with the axe. They were fortunately able to wrestle him to the ground without shooting him. The reason I found this fortunate was that the man was suffering from dementia. He lived only 5 houses down, and his son was taking care of him. He left the house while they were sleeping, and thought he was living his teenage years again. So when he saw the axe and the chopping block, he just began cutting firewood. Now again, I don't know how scary this story is, but the man had dementia, and he did take a swing at one of the cops with the axe. If I had gone out there like I had considered doing, and he swung at me, I wouldn't have been able to defend myself. I would have been very injured, or a whole lot worse. Number 4. Pizza. It seems like the 2 biggest sources for scary stories on YouTube seem to be pizza delivery and babysitting. Well, mine sort of doubles those. I was babysitting for a family that I had been doing this for several years. They always paid me very well and gave me extra money for pizza for dinner. So a couple of hours after the parents left, and once the kids had done all their homework, I went ahead and ordered the pizza. When the pizza arrived, it was a different guy than I had ever seen before. He was a bit awkward at first, not really seeming to acknowledge I was there, just giving me a really creepy look. After a moment, he looked over at the car and told me that he had gotten the wrong pizza. So he went over to the car, grabbed another pizza, and came to deliver it. He gave me the pizza, I paid him, and he left. When I opened the pizza, I noticed that I actually had the wrong pizza. I assumed that the guy was just a new employee and he had made a mistake. I called the pizza parlor, let them know, and they said they would send out a new pizza. About half an hour later, the kids were getting pretty hungry and frustrated, but finally the pizza came. It was the same pizza guy. He apologized and we exchanged pizzas. He was about to leave before I checked the pizza, but once again, it was the wrong pizza. I called the guy back and he apologized, but now I was getting irritated. He went back, got another pizza, confirmed that it was the right pizza, and then he left. I was bugged by the guy, but was happy that I finally was able to get the kids fed. Halfway through eating the pizza, the doorbell rang. I checked on it, and it was the pizza guy. He told me that I overpaid him for the pizza, which I know that I hadn't. He gave me $10, and I just took it, and he left. He didn't come back for the rest of the night, which was great. I put the kids to bed and read until his parents came home. I got into my car and went home. About 2 hours later, there was a knock at the door. I was still awake because I was studying for a big test. When I answered it, it was the police. Someone had broken into the house I was babysitting for, claiming he was my boyfriend. I had to refute the story and identify who it was. I don't think it comes as any surprise to anyone reading this that it was the pizza guy. He didn't know I was the babysitter, and he assumed I lived in the house. He tried to get into it late at night and got caught claiming, "I'm your daughter's boyfriend." Well, obviously he went to jail, and I have no doubt that he kept screwing up on purpose in order to keep coming back to the house. I am sorry that the family I babysitted for had to go through this, but I still watched over their children often. Number 5, the Cornfield. When I was younger, I had to babysit for my younger cousins. I grew up in a very rural environment, although a lot of my relatives were in even more rural conditions. I was one of the older cousins, so I tended to be drafted to babysit for others all the time. And of course, it wasn't a job really, as I didn't really get paid, nor did I get anything special out of it. I was pretty much just expected to do it. On this occasion, I was babysitting for my second cousins. There were 4 younger kids, and they lived on a farm. I actually liked this one though. They had a beautiful and very big farmhouse. The doors had skeleton keyholes in them, which I always just thought was pretty cool. There was a huge basement and a huge attic, full of all sorts of interesting things. The only time I didn't like babysitting there was when this story happened. My parents and my cousin's parents had gone out to the bars. Normally, this meant it was an all-night job. We played some games and watched a little bit of television. They didn't get much TV out there, being as far out as they were. The boys I was babysitting for were 10 and 12, and they were definitely difficult to watch over. Also, being that they lived out in the country, they were used to being outside a lot. I didn't mind really, and knew they wouldn't be in any danger. They may have gotten into trouble, but it would simply be of their own causing. They were out after dark, and when they came back, I noticed that one of them didn't have his shoes on. I asked him where they were, and he said he left them outside by the shed. I told him to go get them, but he refused, claiming he was scared. When I asked him why, he said he was scared of the boy hanging out in the corn. He told me the boy was trying to scare him, saying he was going to take him out into the cornfield. If you understood these boys, or any young boys I guess, boys like to scare other people. And this boy, I knew, was trying to scare me. I also knew I would get chewed out, so I went outside with a flashlight to get the shoes. It wasn't really dark yet, but the sun had mostly gone down. There was a shed right on the edge of the cornfield, and I knew that was the one the boy was talking about, so I went out there to look for the shoes. I could still see, but I knew my vision would be impaired. You know how it is when everything is dark blue instead of black. I went to the shed and was looking around for the shoes. I got frustrated pretty quickly because I was unable to find them right away. While I was cursing, I shined the flashlight up and saw something. It took a second for me to register it, but it was maybe a 13-year-old boy sitting behind the first row of corn. Well, he was more crouched down than sitting, his knees bent, and he was looking at me with a grin on his face. He was also holding the shoes. I fell back, but was able to collect myself and get up. I turned, and I ran as quick as I could back to the house. I went in and locked all the doors. It is odd looking back on this story because I sometimes don't think it is as scary as it was. But then, I remember seeing that boy, shirtless, wearing cutoffs, and crouched down, holding the pair of shoes in front of him, and grinning at me. Yeah, it was pretty scary. Why anyone would be hanging out in the corn like that, I have no idea. I didn't get in trouble for the shoes. I retrieved them in the morning. My cousin told his parents what happened, but they didn't believe him or me. They thought the story was just too weird. Number 6. First job. When I was about 14, my mom decided it was time I started babysitting. Apparently, in her mind, it's just what teenage girls are supposed to do. So when she heard that a coworker needed a babysitter for date night with his wife, I found myself giving up a Friday evening for the promise of $20 and refrigerator privileges. My mother drove me to their house at around 8. She practically pushed me out of the car with a promise to pick me up at 11, and I was on my way to being financially independent. It was a very nice house, in one of those subdivisions where all the houses look alike, but still sell for hundreds of thousands of dollars. The door was answered by a rather handsome, well-dressed gentleman, who I assumed was my mother's co-worker, Barry. "Hi, you must be Jessica. You look just like your mother," he greeted me cheerfully, shaking my hand and leading me into the house. "Lydia is just putting Tommy down now. You probably won't hear a peep from him all night, so just enjoy yourself and try not to blow the house up." He smiled, jovially, and showed me around the house while we waited for his wife. It was absolutely beautiful. They had more living rooms than my house had bedrooms. He was just explaining how to bypass their parental controls on their humongous TV when his wife came into the room. She was beautifully dressed and looked no older than him, but there were lines around her eyes, and she didn't meet my gaze. "Tommy's down for the night," she said, more to the wall than to me. Barry handed me the remote and put an arm around his wife. "Then we'd better get going if we want to make our reservations." He began to lead her to the door. I saw her glance toward the stairs, obviously nervous about leaving her son. I didn't really get it. My mother said that Tommy was about a year old, so this couldn't possibly have been her first time away from him. But I figured it was just a mom thing. I reassured them that I knew how to handle the emergency situations, and I had both of their cell numbers. And Barry led his reluctant wife from the house. I have to admit, I was pretty happy to realize that the kid was going to be asleep, so I didn't really have to do anything. I went to the kitchen and put a frozen pizza in the oven. I microwaved a bag of popcorn to hold me over until it was ready, and then proceeded to the main living room again to see what was on TV. I was messing around with the surround sound system when I realized that there was something odd about all the pictures in the room. None of them contained Tommy. I mean, I could understand the lack of toys around. It was a large house, and they probably had playrooms set up for the little guy. But the lack of pictures seemed odd. Just as I was noticing this, however, I managed to get the surround sound on, and a commercial came on the TV, nearly blowing my ears out. I grabbed the remote and mashed buttons until I managed to silence it. I was prepared to hear screams from Tommy, as the noise explosion certainly would have woken him up. But I heard nothing. That was odd. There was no way it hadn't woke him up. Maybe I just couldn't hear him in this giant house. Well, I figured I'd better check on him just to be sure. As I was walking up the large staircase, I realized they'd not bothered to tell me what room he was in. I spotted a door with a blue dinosaur on it, and figured that must be the one. Not wanting to wake him if he'd somehow slept through the noise, I very slowly and quietly opened the door. The room was dark, except a very soft nightlight on the wall opposite the door. By the dim light, I was once again overwhelmed by the luxury of everything, from the built-in shelves of toys to the sleigh-style convertible crib where the boy still slept. Seeing the small form under the blankets, I was relieved. I watched him a moment by the dim light and was just about to leave when something made me hesitate. Something didn't seem right. I stepped closer to the crib. I just wanted to make sure he was okay. Then I go back downstairs to my popcorn and movie. Another step toward the crib. Another. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, but I didn't know what. As I reached the crib and stood over the sleeping form, it occurred to me. He wasn't breathing. Surely it was a trick of the light. I reached my hand down to put it on his back and feel for movement, but as my hand got closer, I realized there was no heat. A wave of panic washed over me. Something was wrong. He was dead. What had happened? Biting my lip, I reached out and touched him. What I felt under the blanket was not the body of a child. I ripped back the blanket and stared in horror at the eyes of a doll. I stifled a scream as I stepped back, confused and horrified. I quickly turned on the light and looked around the room. Was Tommy old enough to play practical jokes? Was he hiding somewhere in the room laughing? Even as I thought it, I knew it wasn't true. My eyes raked the room. Everything was set up perfectly. There was no child playing in here. The photos that were missing from downstairs were all over this room. There were photos with Santa, family portraits, first steps, first spaghetti, all the usual firsts. But in each one, there was no child. Just this doll. This creepy doll that lay in the crib staring at me. I ran from the room and back downstairs, where I immediately called my mom. She was confused, but she came to get me. She searched the room to make sure I wasn't mistaken somehow, and that there wasn't some child hiding. It didn't take long before she came down the stairs and took me right out to the car. We just left. I figured out later that what had tipped me off that something was wrong was the lack of a smell. The warm, milky smell of a baby had been missing from that room. I was pretty sure no baby had ever lived there. My mom paid me the $20 herself, and she never sent me to babysit again. Number 7. Game Boy. When I was a teenager, way back before the internet and cell phones, we were visiting some family, and when the adults decided to go out, I got left watching my cousins. There were 3 of them, 2 girls age 11 and 9, and the boy, Joey, age 7. I was only 15 myself, but I generally got on well with the girls. Joey, though, he was a terror. I don't know what it was that made him that way. Maybe his parents spoiled him for being the only boy, I'm not sure. I just know he was a terror, beyond what I'd ever known a kid could be. He was the kind of child who would randomly run up and hit you or bite you. If you told him to do something, he'd not stomp his feet and pout. He'd just flat out ignore you. I've had many people say I should have busted his ass when he was in my care, but honestly, I couldn't hold him still long enough without getting bitten. So being put in charge of him on this occasion didn't sit well with me. I took the advice of the oldest sister and bribed him with a video game. I had brought my Game Boy with me, as it had been a long drive here, and while I didn't relish the idea of letting the little bastard play with it, I hoped it would keep him quiet and out of my hair, and for a while it did. I spent the evening watching TV and playing Barbies with the girls. and he sat quietly on the couch and destroyed monsters on my Game Boy. I couldn't have been more relieved. When it started getting late, and the adults hadn't come home yet, I realized it was going to be my responsibility to put him to bed. Usually, with his being the youngest, I would have expected his bedtime to be earlier than the girls, but neither he nor they said anything as the night wore on. I sort of hoped that he'd get sleepy and doze off playing, and I could just put him to bed. The girls began to get tired, and around 10, they were off to brush their teeth and put their PJs on. "I guess it's getting on to bedtime," I hinted. No response. He just kept playing the game. "Aren't you getting tired?" "You can play some more in the morning. It'll still be here." Joey glared up at me from the game. "I'm playing now," he said, and immediately looked back at the screen. Because I hadn't wanted him to waste the batteries, I had removed them prior to letting him play, and he was running it off the AC adapter now. Out of pure frustration, I grabbed the plug and pulled it from the wall. The electronic noises ceased immediately, and he just stared at the screen for a moment. Then, without a word, he stood up, set the Game Boy on the couch, and left the room. I heard the bathroom sink come on and relaxed. He'd gone to brush his teeth. Within 20 minutes, he and the girls were in bed, and I was free to do what I liked. I plugged the Game Boy back in and started up one of my favorite games. Around 11:30, I heard a car pull into the driveway. It was about time they got home. Damn adults going out drinking and leaving me with these kids. Then, to my surprise, I heard a knock at the door. I paused my game and went to answer. I peeked out the window first and saw a police officer. I went cold. Thoughts began racing through my mind of what could have happened to my parents. Shaking, I opened the door. To my surprise, out of the back seat of the car, I saw another officer pull Joey. He was handcuffed, which I thought was odd for a kid. He was also covered in blood. He even had it in his mouth. The officer asked who I was, and I explained. He asked lots of questions, and I began piecing the story together. Joey hadn't gone to bed. He had gone down the street to a neighbor's house. A boy he knew had a Game Boy system. He had knocked on the boy's window. When the boy had opened the door, Joey had stabbed him with his pocket knife. The neighbor boy had screamed and roused his parents, who found Joey sitting on the floor, playing Game Boy, while their son lay bleeding. When they came near him, Joey had bitten them, and when the police came, he'd bitten them too. The police stayed and waited for the adults to get home, which wasn't much longer. My mom and I stayed with the girls, while Joey's parents went to the police station. I always wondered why Joey went down the road to attack another kid. Why didn't he come after me? He knew I had a Game Boy. I was vulnerable, lying there on the couch. There were no parents to come to the rescue. Maybe it was because we were cousins, or maybe in his own twisted mind, he was being nice, because I let him play the Game Boy in the first place. I don't see that side of the family much anymore. Last I heard, he was married, and a great father to his children. I just hope his wife is never foolish enough to shut off the PlayStation when he's not ready to stop playing. Number 8. The Cow. This is a weird story, but I remember it like it happened yesterday, and it is totally true. I was raised out in the country. As a rule, since I was the oldest of the kids, I was always the babysitter. My mom was a single mother, had 5 kids, but went out drinking all the time. She was also a bit of a tramp, so she was always out overnight. Very often, she didn't come back until sometime the following afternoon. On this night, I was watching the other kids when our dogs started barking. It wasn't unusual for them to bark a bit, they were dogs. But tonight, they were really barking, and seemed to not be in any mood to quit. Now, there was a group of boys that lived down the road, and they were known to try and cause trouble. A lot of times, my mom had to go out there and threaten them to get out of the yard. When the dog barking was going on longer than usual, I got the idea that the boys were out there tormenting the dogs or up to something. I took my oldest brother and went out to confront the boys. Of course, I didn't see any of them out there, but there was some sort of weird light coming out from the road. One of the dogs had gotten loose and was out there. So the two of us went out there to collect the dog and to see what was causing the light. Now, the dog that was out by the road was not barking. It was standing there looking. And as we got close to it, my brother kept trying to call for it to come over to us, but it wouldn't. As we got closer, I saw the strangest thing I'd ever seen in my life. It was a cow, and for some reason it was glowing, and the dog was looking right at it. My brother ran up to the cow, obviously unafraid. He felt the cow, which just stood there. It wasn't a ghost because it was solid, but not knowing what the hell it was, I told him to grab the dog and bring it back to the house. It took me telling him a few times, but he eventually did what I told him to do. We tethered the dog and went back inside. We didn't tell the younger kids, because we thought it would be scary for them. Hell, it could have been as simple as those boys putting some sort of glowy paint or something on the cow, but not knowing made it freaky to me. Number 9. Strange Thing. It stared at me, empty eyes, fitted in a distorted, misshapen head, over a gaping black hole of a mouth. It had tucked its spindly body in the far corner of the living room ceiling. It was just beyond my field of view. I had been noticing something in my peripheral vision, but every time I would look, there would be nothing there. I just happened to look without turning my head. My sister's kids were asleep in my room for the night. She needed to attend some sales conference or other, so I was the default free babysitter. I was almost never in the living room this late. I wonder if I would have ever known. It was straining my eyes, but I could not look away. It stared blankly at me and did not seem to notice me looking, until my head twitched ever so slightly. We locked gazes in the TV twilight of the room. Its eyes were large and dry, and had no shine, as if they were endless. I blinked and it was gone. I tried to forget, but I don't think I ever will. Number 10. Disliked dog. Note, this story involves a dog. It might be unpleasant for animal lovers. I knew this guy named Tony in school. I never noticed anything weird about him, to tell you the truth. I mean, he seemed just like a normal kid. He was even a bit popular, played football in high school, and got decent grades. He was blonde, in good shape, and even relatively attractive. The reason I mentioned that I never noticed anything weird about him was that, in stories with obsessed men or boys, the boys are always described as being creepy or strange or some sort. Tony was pretty obsessed with me, really. He asked me out quite a few times, and I always told him no. I think it took him a long time, but he finally got the point. I guess it was difficult for a guy like him to imagine that a girl wouldn't be interested in him. And honestly, it wasn't that creepy, just persistent and annoying. The last time I remembered really talking to him was when I was talking to a few girls that I hung out with in high school. They wanted me to go to the football game that night. I let them know that I couldn't. I was babysitting for a family who was going to be at the game. Tony was near us talking with some friends, and he obviously overheard us. He said he was disappointed I wouldn't be there to see him play. I told him he should focus more on winning the game, and less on whether I would be there. I went back to talking to my friends. They asked who I was sitting for, and I let them know. It was a job, that I loved the kids, but I really hated their dog. I told them the dog gave me the creeps, and it was hard to handle. The job would be perfect if not for the dog. The parents knew that the dog didn't like me much, and vice versa, so they always put the dog outside when I was over. Well, that night was no different. I was at the house, and I got the kids fed. We watched a little bit of television. I kept watching the clock, wishing that I could be at the game. The parents wouldn't be home after the game either, so I wouldn't be able to go out and celebrate what I was hoping would be a victory for us. After the kids were put to bed, and I knew the game was over, I decided to just do some homework while I watched television. It was relatively quiet. The dog, who had been fed and had water, began barking. I looked up at the clock and saw that it was nearly midnight. Although I didn't look forward to doing it, I knew I'd have to go and check on the dog. I was sure it was disturbing the peace or something to have a dog barking like that all night. With a huff, I put all my books to the side and decided to get up. I got up and was making my way over to the door when I heard the dog make the most god-awful yelping noise. It repeated this a few times. I couldn't explain to you how horrible the sound was. It was maybe the purest sound of agony I had heard in my life. I didn't know what to do, really. I was scared. I then went out to the back sliding glass door. I opened it up, and there was the dog, lying in its own blood on the back porch. I was certain the dog was dead. I went into the kitchen and grabbed a knife for protection. I made sure all of the doors were locked, and they were. I went to check on the children to make sure they were fine. They were. That's when I called both the parents and the police. The parents came and got there shortly after the police did. There were no signs of an attempted break-in or anything. The parents had no idea who might have wanted to kill their dog. I didn't think about it really until I talked to some of my friends. I'd asked them what the game was like and what they had done afterward. We had won, of course, but my friends were a little puzzled that Tony hadn't been at the party. It was a bit weird because he was a bit of a partier, but he kept giving me these weird smiles and what I took to be knowing glances. When I finally got a chance to talk to him, he commented, "I bet that babysitting job is a lot more pleasant now." Now, I know this wasn't proof that he did anything. Pretty much everyone knew the dog got killed, especially in my circle of friends. But it was still just an incredibly creepy thing to say to me. Hey all, Killer Orange Cat here. If you want to read print versions of these stories, you can do that at the Killer Orange Cat subreddit. In the meantime, if you like this video, please let me know by hitting the like button. If you're not already subscribed to Killer Orange Cat, please consider subscribing by using the button below, or using the icon of Ichigo the cat that will appear at the end of this closing. Feel free to leave me a comment to let me know what you think of the video, and consider sharing it with someone you think might enjoy it. You can always follow Ichigo and myself on Facebook and Twitter using the links in the description. If you have a story you'd like narrated on Killer Orange Cat, please feel free to submit it to the address provided in the description. My main requirement is that the story is original, meaning it has not yet been read on any other YouTube channel. And please, whatever you do, don't forget to make sure to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where Killer Orange Cat might be hiding. Good night.